everybody. Welcome in to Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have DARI PAYROW from R.S. Andrews with us, and all of you as well, as we take a look at a busy week in college football that will not include the Georgia Bulldogs after a schedule change from last week that moved the off week for Georgia up a week. They'll now play Kentucky next Saturday. Are you following all of that thus far? And, of course, we'll talk about the games that will be taking place over the course of the next few minutes, and also licking our wounds after a bad week from a week ago. And DARI, we'll show the standings here in a moment and kind of where we shook out after last week. But in one way, it's somewhat comforting in that I think you and I both said a couple of times last week that some of these games felt difficult to predict. And at least on the one hand, we were correct in the difficult nature of the predictions, because it was not a good week for me, not really a good week for you in terms of the win-loss record. And really, every single one of our DawgNation folks also kind of took it on the chin a little bit last week in a weekend that kind of had the look of one that might be trouble to make some prognostications on.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess the silver lining is I went perfect. So after my game picks, I was 0 for. I was completely opposite on those. The only one I hit was the over on the Georgia-Alabama game, which kind of the flow of how that game went, I was kind of on there. But the problems with betting in general this year is really the unpredictability in college football. We've seen a ton of upsets. And, I mean, look how crazy the year is. You have Kentucky that hasn't won in Knoxville in 36 years, and they blow out Tennessee. Tennessee doesn't turn the ball over. They throw 2 pick sixes, like right out the gates. You have Oklahoma that starts the season 1-2. And that just shows anything can happen. The point spreads have been extremely volatile this season. Teams are breaking molds in ways that make it unpredictable to get any kind of feel. And you also have stuff that are going against traditional line movements or betting lines against the flow of money when you look at that, or if there's any bettors that look at that. It's really not following any trends right now. So as the season rolls along, Brandon, just expect more chaos. I think it's just going to continue.
I think it's exactly right. So as far as how we did do last week, DawgNation Daily audience still on top of the standings at the moment, 18-13 on the year, just 1-5 last week, though. Jeff Sintel coming in second right now at 17-14 on the season. He was also, though, just 1-5 a week ago. It was that kind of weekend for many people. Mike Griffith also with a 17-14 mark on the year, just 2-4 last Saturday, though. DARI PAYROW after that, the inverse, 14-17 on the season. As DARI said, 1-5 last week for him. I was 2-4 last week. That puts me at 13-18 on the year. Connor Riley had his best week of the year last week, a 3-3 mark, the best week of anyone for last week, but still just 11-20 on the year. So a lot of ground for some folks to make up. Looking forward to hopefully better picks this week. And as we said before, it will not include the Georgia Bulldogs, but it does include a couple of interesting games from the SEC and the debut of the Big Ten, which we'll get to before things are all said and done here. Let's begin now with the second consecutive week's worth of Auburn on the road as a 3-point favorite, this time in Oxford, Mississippi against Ole Miss. Wild ride for the Rebels as of late. Kept it close against Alabama in one of the most prominent shootouts of the season, but last week went on the road, could not maintain that momentum, lost outright against Arkansas, looking to get back on track against South Carolina. In the case of the Auburn Tigers, they are a reeling ball club after having lost to Georgia, arguably should have lost to Arkansas on the heels of one of the most egregious calls to end that game 2 weeks ago. And then last week, really handled by South Carolina on the road. Tigers on the road again here this week as well. As I said before, looking at a 3-point margin in their favor there in Oxford. Mike Griffith, start us off on Auburn and Ole Miss. Your thoughts on this battle inside the SEC West?
Boy, that's tough. That is really, really tough. The way Arkansas was able to beat Ole Miss, I got to go with Auburn. Tank Bigsby right now, what an incredibly talented running back. Maybe Najee Harris, the only one better in the league. I'm going to take Auburn to win this game and cover over Ole Miss. Let's make it 30-24.
So not a strong pick there by Mike necessarily. Maybe a little unsure of himself, but he does take Auburn. Jeff Sintel, how about your thoughts on how things go with the Auburn Tigers and the Ole Miss Rebels? Take it away.
I think Auburn. I think this time Bo Nix is going to throw the ball into the end zone instead of scrambling in the final minutes in a clutch play. Lay the points. I like Auburn winning this one by about 7 to 10 points. I believed in you once, Lane Kiffin. The lane train got derailed for me, and I don't like that line at all for Ole Miss.
So, Jeff, also on the side of Auburn, both of our scribes in agreement thus far. Connor Riley, your turn. Go ahead.
I don't think either of these teams are any good, but I trust Auburn and Gus Malzahn and really Kevin Steele a little bit more than I trust Lane Kiffin at this point. So give me Auburn -3 on the road.
Connor on Auburn. DawgNation Daily Audience disagrees. 58% take Ole Miss here. And this is one of those things where you got to be careful with this many people lining up on an Auburn side, just given the fact that Auburn itself hasn't been very good thus far this year. There's also an indication that maybe some smart money came in on Ole Miss in this game early in the week. You saw a pretty big line drop at the very beginning from when this was announced. Typically, big line movements like that suggest large wagers, which can suggest smart money. However, in this case, though, Dari, I am still going to take the flyer on Auburn. I'm not going to sell low on Auburn after being wrong about them a couple of times already this year. But this is a season in which I think there's going to be a gravitational pull back towards the middle, kind of a movement towards 5-5, which means I do think Auburn has more wins coming. A game like this against Ole Miss, I think, is a pretty good candidate for that. As I said before, I was wrong about Auburn a week ago, but I don't want to be wrong on the other side this week. So give me Auburn again. That puts the flow on the side of Auburn. And I should explain to our audience where this game works. After all the DawgNation experts weigh in, the DawgNation daily listeners and viewers, DARI PAYROW gets a chance to decide if he wants to go with the flow and join the consensus on the game that we're discussing. In this case, it is Auburn and Ole Miss. In this case, Dari, the flow is on the side of Auburn. Do you want to go with the flow?
I can't do it. I've really struggled with the Auburn picks. They burned me last week. I just think they're not that good with Nix under center in that offense. Ole Miss has a ton of offense, over 500 yards per game. They have no defense, which is probably a recipe to get Nix going and kind of fix his awful, horrendous quarterback stats. Just of note, Ole Miss has been losing a lot of players sitting out the positive COVID test, and a lot of these guys are their starters on the defensive side of the ball. So even worse defense is going to be out there. Auburn probably wins this game, but I'm just going to take the home dog. I'm kind of going against the grain. I'm not confident about this game at all. It can go either way. Both these teams have a lot of issues. Ton of movement, like you said, on the line. Also on the over/under on the line in this game, it's gone up 7 points since it's opened, from 64 to 71. So a lot of money's coming in on this game.
All right, so we're off and running here on Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. Much the same way the picks flow here on our show, you can keep the air conditioning flowing out of your vents, the hot water flowing from your water heater through the shower the way that you want it to go, all of that stuff when you trust R.S. Andrews for your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, and electric needs. You can find DARI PAYROW and his entire team there online at rsandrews.com. Story after story, they've delivered smiles. If you're dealing with one of those issues, heating system as we head towards the winter time of the year, way to put a smile back on your face is to trust our friends at R.S. Andrews to provide that fix for you. So check them out online. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. R.S. Andrews can do all of that for you. All right, the next game we'll cover here is the SEC rivalry known as the third Saturday in October. It is not the third Saturday in October coming up this weekend, but Alabama and Tennessee do renew their rivalry again. Georgia fans obviously fresh off having seen Alabama a week ago dominating in the second half to beat the Dogs, now going on the road to take on the Tennessee Vols. Reeling Tennessee is, after having lost to Georgia, got obliterated last week by Kentucky, and now try to save face a little bit by at least trying to keep it close against Alabama. The definition of what close might be, the experts say 21 points. That is what Alabama has been favored over Tennessee here this week. With that in mind, Mike Griffith, your thought on the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Tennessee Vols?
This is where Alabama would be due for a letdown after Najee has 31 carries and Devontae has 13 targets. But I think Tennessee has got some internal issues. I think they've got some internal bleeding here. And even though Alabama won't play as well as they did against Georgia, they'll play well enough to cover this spread. I'm going to take Alabama to win this game 41-17.
So Mike takes Alabama right there. Jeff Sintel, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, not quite the third Saturday in October. It's the fourth Saturday in October. I kind of like that as a number of that number is akin to the number of touchdowns Alabama will be better than Tennessee. I think Jeremy Pruitt will be talking about his defensive line. He'll be talking about his cornerbacks. He'll be talking about his safeties. He'll be talking about his linebackers. I think Alabama will roll over the ball.
So also Alabama for Jeff Sintel. Connor Riley, now it's your turn.
I know Biz, he's trying to point me in the direction of Tennessee, but I just can't do it with the Volunteers this week. I backed them last week. They burned me. I think this team wants to quit on Jeremy Pruitt, and I think Alabama's going to give them every opportunity to. I like Alabama big here this week.
So clean sweep for Alabama thus far. DawgNation daily listeners and viewers going to join in on the fray. Bama earned their respect last week, 91% to take the Crimson Tide to cover the 21-point spread on the road here. I'm going to be just a total contrarian on this for really very little reason other than the fact that Jeremy Pruitt's actually been pretty good against the spread. They covered against Alabama last year as well and came with an eyelash of covering against Georgia last season too before the scoop and score at the end of the game prevented that from happening. Of course, Tennessee went on its winning streak. Now it's on a bit of a losing streak. But I still like Jeremy Pruitt keeping games closer than the experts think. There's obviously a lot of turmoil in Knoxville this week with the defensive line coach being fired after 4 games, big buyout paid there. Eyes open. Jared Garantano has been criticized mightily. This is one of those games where if Pruitt wants to coach to keep it close, he may have a chance to do that. And Alabama may be satisfied just to get out of there with a game in which they're not really threatened, but also not ever really called upon to dial up any style points. There's no way I think Tennessee could win this game, but maybe winning the game is not exactly their goal. As I said before, Pruitt's been good against the number in his Tennessee career. So I don't mind being on an island on this because it just seems fun to kind of tout the underdog here. I'll take the Vols plus 21, but the flow is heavily on the side of Alabama. You want to go with the flow and take the Crimson Tide.
I'm going to go with the flow, taking the Tide to cover. I'm going back to the formula of Saban betting 101, which is don't bet against him. He's going to cover. It's a lot of points to lay on the road. I think Tennessee's going to come out this game fighting. But Pruitt Fighters defensive, assistant defense coordinator, defensive line coach after the loss to Kentucky. I don't think that's going to help them in this game against Bama's top flight offense.
So that is that. We now turn our attention to a much less high-profile game in the SEC. In fact, it was one that wasn't even originally on the schedule. This is a makeshift game on the heels of Florida's cancellation last week. Kentucky now travels to Missouri. Wildcats are 5-point road favorites here. And I guess it's worth pointing out that for Missouri, this will be its second consecutive game that is different than what the original schedule said. Really, everybody's playing a different game than the original schedule. This is different even than the modified schedule that came out last in the summer. You'll remember that Missouri beat LSU recently. After that game was moved to Columbia on the heels of bad weather there in Louisiana that was expected. I don't know that it actually ever even came, but LSU ended up going on the road and losing to Missouri. Now Missouri gets a chance to host Kentucky as 5-point underdogs here. Kentucky, obviously, the opponent next Saturday for the Georgia Bulldogs. With all of that established, 5-point underdogs at home is Missouri against Kentucky. Mike Griffith, go ahead and give us your early thoughts here.
Well, it is the show me state, and really the Tigers should have beaten Kentucky in the last 2 meetings and didn't. So I think they've got a score to settle. I think Kentucky gets caught looking ahead and gets upset by Missouri. I'm going to take Missouri 24-21.
So Mike calling for a Missouri outright win. Obviously, that would be a big setback for the Dogs' opponent next Saturday. Jeff Sintel, which side are you on? Kentucky, Missouri?
My man Mike's calling that one a trap game. I beg to differ. I think Kentucky is probably the second best team in the SEC East, probably at least the second most physical team in the SEC East. I would give Missouri, if you were handing me 14 points with Missouri, I would still take Kentucky in this one. Big Blue Nation comes into the Georgia game with some steam next week.
So Jeff takes Kentucky. Connor Riley, your thoughts on the Wildcats and the Tigers?
This Kentucky offense is not very good. They do not throw the ball very well. They just play defense and try and run the ball. But Missouri played really well against LSU. They've also got the best named quarterback in the SEC in Connor Beasley. So because of that, give me Missouri at home dog. Give me Missouri +5.
Connor takes Missouri. DawgNation daily listeners and viewers, they disagree. You won't see this on your screen, but 78% do take Kentucky there in that spot. Obviously, a little bit of a look ahead to Georgia's next opponent, and a lot of Dog fans like what they see with the Wildcats. I am not going to be quite so confident in Kentucky here. I would ask the question of who is Kentucky to be favored on the road versus anybody right now. They lost to an Auburn team to begin the season. They did get the blowout win against Mississippi State, but a lot of that on the basis of the interceptions that KJ Costello throws in that game. Last Saturday would certainly seem to be impressive against Tennessee, but let's wait and find out. Was that an outlier performance? Was that the start of some erosion for Tennessee? Was that just kind of a blip on the radar, kind of a fluke performance all the way around? I think there's enough unanswered questions that I would take a pause here on Kentucky going to Missouri. I don't think Missouri is very good, but they do throw the ball pretty well. And that's at least enough to give you a puncher's chance in this game in your home stadium. I think that LSU certainly found out that Missouri is a tough place to go. And I still think that Kentucky, regardless of records, is probably an inferior team to LSU. It's enough for me, just for the fun of it, to take a flyer on Missouri. With that in mind, the flow is now on the side of Missouri. You want to go with the flow and take the underdog Tigers in the spot, Dari?
Hell no. Have to take Kentucky here. Missouri's been pretty good at home against the spread. But again, they're another team that has a lot of players that are out for COVID positive tests. Their two wide receivers, their two best wide receivers are out because they're in that group of people that have tested positive. And Missouri's defense is atrocious. They haven't held anyone under 35 points this year. So Kentucky looks like they're finding themselves. I kind of think they're becoming the team that I thought they were at the beginning of the season. Really good balance, great defense. I think that's enough for them to get the win and cover on the road.
Let me ask you a serious question. Do you think Kentucky right now offensively is good enough to take advantage of a defense? Like you said, Missouri's defense has really been pretty porous. Do you think Kentucky has the firepower? This is a fairly conservative team under Mark Stoops. Do they have the firepower to take advantage of what has been pretty vulnerable Missouri defense?
I would say Kentucky's offense is like a knuckleball pitcher. Like, you don't know where it's coming, where it's going. You don't know the quarterback running. Are they going to run the ball? Sometimes they throw a ball pretty well. I think it's a mix of you don't know what they're going to do, and it's kind of all together. I think it'll all come together against a really bad defense. So I think they're going to be able to move the ball. I think they're going to control the clock. I think Stoops' defense is going to show up big, especially with those two wide receivers out. I just think they have a little bit of momentum, and I think they're just a better balanced team on both sides of the ball.
All right, let's turn our attention now to another game in the SEC. South Carolina going to LSU. LSU playing here as a 6.5-point favorite. Tigers did not get a chance to play last Saturday. Supposed to play Florida, but Florida's COVID outbreak, which, by the way, is still ongoing, prevented that from taking place. So Death Valley will now be the host site for South Carolina coming in this week. Gamecocks feeling pretty good about itself as of late. Got the win against Auburn last Saturday, blew out Vanderbilt the week before that. And do not forget, the Gamecocks also covered the spread in their game prior to that against the Florida Gators. So quietly, South Carolina's actually played some better football than maybe some folks realize, but step up in weight class, at least in terms of trying to win on the road, where they are 6.5-point underdogs against LSU. The betting market here totally disregarding LSU's bad play to at least still show them some respect. With that in mind, Tigers at home as the favorite. Mike Griffith, go ahead and start us off.
I think LSU is really bad. I was saying that the biggest surprise of the season was how good Arkansas was, but I had someone challenge me and said they think that the biggest surprise of the season is how bad LSU is. I think South Carolina got an emotional win for their coach, Will Muschamp. I think that carries over, and I'm going to take South Carolina to beat LSU 27-24.
So Mike takes South Carolina right there. Jeff Sintel, your thoughts on LSU hosting the Gamecocks?
I tell you what, fellas, nothing would surprise me more if helmets cracked open and aliens crawled outside in this game. Who's going to win this game? Up and down performances for both schools this year. I just got to go with a more talented team. That team is LSU. Give me LSU. I think LSU is going to win this game by about 7 to 12 points.
Jeff Sintel takes LSU. Connor Riley, how about your thoughts on the game?
LSU is just not a very good football team right now. Miles Brennan probably not going to play in this game. I think all that factors in. I know it's at home. Give me South Carolina here. I like them 6, depending on where you get this, 6.5. If you can get it there, I'd say probably grab.
So Connor takes South Carolina. DawgNation Daily audience disagrees on that. 61% take LSU here. We should also report as of midweek, Ed Orgeron, the LSU coach, was essentially confirming the possibility that quarterback Miles Brennan might not play in this game. It looks like Max Johnson, the former Georgia high school product, 4-star signing to the Tigers, may get a chance to play quarterback for LSU on Saturday. And Dari, here's the one thing I'll say about this game. I think that a lot of people may have a tendency to want to overlook this game because there's this belief that South Carolina's not very good because of the record from a year ago and the fact that they've had a couple of ugly performances thus far this season. And there's also the belief that LSU is really a mess after having lost to Missouri and gotten handled by Mississippi State in week 1. I'd be really careful, though, writing off either of these two teams as of yet. I think South Carolina proved its liveliness over the course of the last couple of weeks, beating Auburn, really dominating Vanderbilt, laughably, ahead of the 2-touchdown spread that game had in Nashville. So I think they set themselves up to be kind of a lively opponent, live dog against LSU on Saturday. But Vegas is telling you something here. At a 6.5-point number, this is still a talent level from LSU that Vegas and the betting markets respect here. So I think that LSU covers this number. I think you should treat it as a good win for LSU when they do. And I think it should cause you to consider still taking LSU this season. The game against Missouri was ugly. The game against Mississippi State week 1 was awful. But all that does is I think give you a chance to still buy low occasionally on LSU. Believe it or not, I'm going to take the Tigers here. That puts the flow on the side of LSU as well. You want to go with the flow and take LSU.
I do. I'm going to go with the flow. Tigers at home, I'll lay the points. That's right out of the playbook. It's probably not a smart thing to do in an unconventional year. My gambling playbook hasn't worked this year yet, which would probably mean South Carolina covers this game or wins this outright. LSU just doesn't look right and has a lot of issues on the defensive side of the ball. But they've had an extra week off to prepare for this game, so that gives me a slight edge to picking them here at home.
Yeah, I think that's a fun thing to think about. A really, really interesting showdown. And this is just one of those years where I think you got to be really careful writing off anybody in the SEC, assuming that good team's going to keep winning, bad team's going to keep losing. It's just a week-to-week grind here that I think that you can't give up on anybody too soon. So that's the story when it comes to the SEC. Let's now step outside the Southeastern Conference. In a moment, we'll welcome in the Big Ten to the start of their 2020 season, but a couple of games to look at before we get there. One of these in particular, a battle of top 25 teams in the ACC. North Carolina, fresh off a loss last week to Florida State, gets a chance to battle one of its in-state rivals, NC State, doing so as a big favorite here. Still 16.5-point number for UNC against NC State. So obviously still a lot of respect out there for Mac Brown's team. Mike, start us off on the Tar Heels and the Wolfpack. Your thought on this battle out of the ACC?
Yeah, tough loss for the Tar Heels last week. I'm going to have to go with North Carolina and Sam Howell to rebound in a big way against North Carolina State, win that football game 34-17.
So Mike takes UNC there despite the big number. Jeff Sintel, how about you?
Yeah, I think this is one of those times in college football where sometimes a roster can only get up for like 2 or 3 games a year. I think there'll be a market correction in the North Carolina season. This is a rivalry game. I don't think this will be competitive at all. I see North Carolina taking this thing by something like 27-10. I know that's a chunky point spread there, but I think 27-10, 31-10 sounds right for the Tar Heels.
So Jeff takes UNC there to bounce back after the loss. What about you, Connor? Your thoughts on the Wolfpack and the Tar Heels?
You guys are dead wrong on North Carolina State. 2 weeks ago, they were a 14-point underdog against Pitt, beat them. This North Carolina team can't play defense. NC State's got a pretty good offense going right now. Give me North Carolina State to cover.
So Connor, the lone contrarian at the moment, he's on the side of the NC State Wolfpack here. DawgNation Daily audience, they disagree. 73% take North Carolina here. Typically, the audience does favor the favorites. This is one of those, Dari, where I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about NC State. I really don't. But I think UNC is actually pretty good. But do I think they're 17 points better than an in-state rival in a game like this? Probably not. This is just worth an NC State flyer to me because I think Sam Howell is one of the better quarterbacks in the country, but I don't know that I trust UNC to blow out NC State here in this spot. For the fun of it, I'll take the underdog plus the 16.5. However, the flow is on the side of UNC. You want to go with the flow.
I don't. I'm kind of in your thought process here. I'm going to take NC State. 16.5 seems like a lot of points in a rivalry game. Both these teams have struggled on defense, so I think that leads to the game being a little bit closer because both teams can score on each other a lot. Here's a couple notes on these two teams clashing together. The underdog against the spread have cashed 12 of the last 17 games between them, and NC State has won 5 of the past 6 meetings at North Carolina in Chapel Hill straight up.
Good numbers. Good numbers. Very, very, very good data there on that and worth paying attention to. How about a top 25 matchup also in the Big 12, where obviously that league has had some setbacks this season. Oklahoma not ranked in the top 25 right now. Texas also had its struggles as well. So the lone hope for a playoff team, the Big 12 right now, would appear to be Oklahoma State. They get a chance to host Matt Campbell, the head coach, and the Iowa State Cyclones coming up on Saturday. And the Cowboys do so as 3.5-point favorites there inside Stillwater. So with that in mind, Mike Griffith, give us your thought on the Pokes and the Cyclones.
Wow. Yeah, this is a tough one here. You never know what's going to happen out there in the Plain States. But I'm going to go with the Cowboys here. I'm going to ride the Cowboys to a 31-24 victory over the Cyclones.
So it is Oklahoma State, therefore, Mike Griffith. Jeff Sintel, what about you?
Goodness, now we get into these teams where they have about, I think, 4 or 5 4-star prospects on each side. That's how much different it is in the Big 12. Oklahoma State is the last chance, I believe, for the Big 12 to get a team in the Final Four. I just like Iowa State. I like what that program's doing. I like how they've been able to win games like this in the past, even when they're not supposed to. Give me those points, and I'm going to take the Cyclones in this.
So it is Jeff on Iowa State. Connor Riley, go ahead.
I'm riding with Brock Purdy. I'm riding with Matt Campbell. I like Iowa State to win this game outright and sweep both Oklahoma schools.
Connor gives you a little love there for the Cyclones quarterback, Brock Purdy. How about the audience? DawgNation Day audience, 64% take Oklahoma State here. Dari, I'm going to keep this one pretty simple for me as well. I do think Matt Campbell is one of the better coaches in America working with less than elite talent. I don't think Iowa State gets those types of players. I think that Campbell's a better coach than Mike Gundy probably is at Oklahoma State. We've seen a lot of years in which Oklahoma State's had the chance for the big win that really propels them in the national conversation. They never get it. It just never happens. I would say this is another example of that on Saturday. Better coach. I'm getting points. I don't mind going to the road on Stillwater. That's not a sold-out stadium typically. It can get loud, but obviously in the COVID times, you don't have too much to worry about there. I think all of that adds up is all the reason in the world to take Iowa State. I've taken a lot of underdogs here this week. I think Iowa State, though, is a fairly confident pick for me. That puts the flow on the side of the Cyclones as well. You want to go with the flow?
I don't. I'm going to take the Cowboys. They're at home. They're in the driver's seat for the Big 12. First time they've kind of really been there in a long time. They've had 2 weeks off. They had a bye and then they had a game rescheduled because of COVID with their opponent. So they're well rested. There's plenty of time to prepare for this game. I think that's going to be the difference because this game is going to be really close. Both teams love to run the football. Iowa State's been balling. They've scored at least 31 points in their last 3 games. But I think Oklahoma State has the better defense. Should be a fun game to watch. Here's a few trends coming into this game. The underdog between these two teams is 5-0 against the spread in their last 5 meetings. Oklahoma State is 5-1-1 in their last 7 in conference games, and Oklahoma State is 13-3 against the spreads in their last 16 against winning teams.
So good numbers all the way around there from Dari PAYROW. We love when he brings the data like that. A fun thing to consider. And by the way, as much as Dari knows about the point spreads and the data, I can promise you that he and the entire team there at R.S. Andrews know even more about all your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, your electric needs. We're coming up on a time of the year where it's about to get colder. We want to make sure your heating system is ready to go for the winter that's on its way. Get the peace of mind that you need by getting your system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Check out rsandrews.com for more on that. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. It's one of the reasons why we love saying R.S. Andrews here on Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews each and every week. All right, now to the Big Ten, which, by the way, we may have a little bit of a, speaking of winter on its way, we may have some winter-type weather in a couple of Big Ten spots before the weekend is done. Let us begin with this one, though. Nebraska going to Ohio State. Buckeyes sit as a 26-point home favorite, and obviously the team that so much of the curiosity in the Big Ten surrounds because of the fact that the Buckeyes would stand as a legitimate playoff contender, it would seem, after being the playoff a season ago and a obvious national championship contender as well. It has the potential of getting going against Scott Frost and the Huskers on Saturday. Nebraska has not won on the road against a top 10 team since 1997. So a big streak of on-field futility for Nebraska in games like this, and no one's really expecting that to change on Saturday, but the point spread could clearly come into play. With that in mind, Ohio State hosting Nebraska. Mike Griffith, what do you got?
Yeah, I like that Black Shirts defense. If Justin Fields would have spent one more weekend at Ohio State instead of watching a Georgia practice, I probably would have taken the Buckeyes to cover. But that one weekend, that lack of preparation, I'm going to go with Nebraska to cover the spread. Ohio State wins 31-13.
So Mike takes Nebraska right there. Jeff Sintel, what about you?
Curious scheduling for the opening week. I cannot be convinced that the Big Ten did not schedule Nebraska and Ohio State to dole out some medicine for Nebraska for being so vocal during all these preseason meetings. Everybody talks about Alabama's receivers. I think by the end of the year, people are going to wonder whether or not Ohio State's receivers are not actually better than Alabama's receivers. I like Ohio State huge, 30, 35 points. Justin Fields' Heisman campaign gets underway.
So Jeff Sintel takes Ohio State. Connor Riley, go ahead.
Reckless speculation here, but I believe Kevin Warren has told Ryan Day and given him a mission to embarrass Nebraska on Saturday, and I believe that is what is going to happen to the Cornhuskers. Give me Ohio State minus 26 or whatever the actual point spread is. It won't be high enough.
So Connor Riley takes Ohio State. DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers, they agree to the tune of 83% also on the Buckeyes. And I'm going to join the fray and take Ohio State too. Here's what it comes down for me. I think that handicapping these Big Ten games is really difficult because of how long the layoff has been. I think we're all still processing who is and who isn't playing for these teams. And I think the level of practice focus for the guys who are playing still probably matters a bit too. But while I think it's an oversimplification to say that the Big Ten returned because Ohio State is a national championship contender, clearly in any conversation with the Big Ten returning, that was one of the things everybody acknowledged is that it matters to the Buckeyes because of how talented they probably are. That means I think in any kind of close scenario, I think calls go the way of Ohio State. I think the officiating will think twice about making a bad call against them. And I think that Ohio State is heavily motivated for each of its games. And in most cases, it's going to be a pretty sizable favorite, including this particular Saturday against Nebraska, where Scott Frost has really just brought nothing to Lincoln here thus far. I don't think 26 is anywhere near too much in a game like this. I think Ohio State, after having not played for a while, is probably looking to flex a little bit. And I will take the Buckeyes minus the 26. And that puts the flow on the side of Ohio State. Dari, you want to go with the flow, or is there an argument here for the underdog?
Oh, no. Definitely going with the flow. There's no argument for Nebraska. Just so you know, there's been a lot of line movement on this game. It opened at 21 and really quickly got as high as 27.5. Mm-hmm. It's now sitting right around 26. Nebraska just hasn't been good. I think Ohio State's going to want to make an early statement to let everyone know that they're a team that belongs in the playoffs and national title contender.
As we said before, when you see a line that moves a half point, then maybe a half point, that's just public money kind of trickling a little bit at a time. But when you see one jump 4 or 5 points quickly like that, that's an immediate response to some big bets that typically come in. Not every big bet is made by a sharp bettor. Sometimes it's just a rich guy that doesn't care about losing money. But oftentimes a big bet like that moves the point spread, you can typically put some heft behind that. So maybe in the case of Ohio State, that is what's going on. Our final pick for the week also involves the Big Ten. And as said before, check your forecast for this one as Minnesota hosts Michigan for the Little Brown Jug, one of those fun trophy games in the Big Ten. I believe, Dari, maybe you know the weather situation better than I do. I believe they're expecting the possibility of snow in Minneapolis this weekend for this one, right?
Sounds about standard. tis the season.
I guess so. As the season begins, we're already talking about snow there. There's also been some line movement kind of bouncing around on this one. Obviously, with a line at this level, you got to try to shop it one way or another. But the Gophers 3-point home underdogs against Michigan on Saturday. Mike Griffith covered the Big Ten for a long time. Why don't you start us off with that in mind on the Wolverines and the Golden Gophers?
This is a tough one because Michigan is the more talented team, but there's just so many distractions in Ann Arbor that Zingerman's Deli is irresistible for these Wolverines players. Don't know if they're really in shape after eating all that good food at Zingerman's Deli. I'm going to take the Golden Gophers to tunnel into that Michigan defense and pull out a 26-23 upset.
So Mike takes Minnesota right there. Jeff Sintel, how about your thought on Michigan, Minnesota out of the Big Ten?
I think the number's 3. Man, there's a huge gap in teams here. You almost want to sit there and look at these rosters and say, who's opted in, who's still opted back out from COVID? I know Minnesota gets some playmakers back. I got to go Wolverines. I got to go with the more talented roster, especially in the tight turnaround and getting their seasons back together. I think the line is as low as 1.5. In some places I've seen, we're going with it here at 3.5. This game isn't that complicated. I think there's some elementary schoolers out there sipping some Coke right now that could probably pick this game as a Michigan Wolverine win as well.
So Jeff is on Michigan. Connor Riley, what about you?
This game is the oldest trophy game in America. They will be playing for the Little Brown Jug. And I believe, as much as I want to pick Tanner Morgan, Rashad Bateman, PJ Fleck here, I think Michigan's going to find a way to get it done. I know they've had a lot of opt-outs, but I still think there's a lot of talent on that Michigan team. And because of that, give me the Wolverines here to win by 3. And I very much like that number at 3, and I'd say 3.5.
Connor takes Michigan. DawgNation Daily audience, they don't agree. DawgNation Daily listeners and viewers don't typically love Jim Harbaugh to the tune of 55%. They take Minnesota plus the points here. Dar, here's one of those things where if people have access to this, an in-game wager might make some sense, get a chance to see these two teams a little bit. I'd be really wary about making a pick on this game sight unseen for the simple fact that this, I don't mean to bring, non-football stuff into this, but Michigan, Minnesota, those two states that were among the most locked down states for a while, and also two of the universities that seemed as against playing football as any for quite some time there as well. I don't know that really trickles down to the players, but we have had high-profile opt-outs on both sides here. I don't know that I have a real good sense of what to take with either one of these teams. But if I have a chance to take, a PJ Fleck team at home catching a couple of points, that's probably worth the flyer to me. I think back to the beginning of the season when BYU Navy played, first game of the really first high-profile game of the season. Within the first 5-10 minutes of the game, we knew that BYU was ready to play. We knew that Navy was not. This may be one of those things where early going we see one of these teams has handled the layoff better than the other. If you have a chance at an end-game wager, you can profit off that. But forced to make the pick sight unseen, I'll take a small flyer on Fleck and the Golden Gophers plus the points. I will take Minnesota. That puts the flow, though, still on the – actually puts the flow on the side of Minnesota by a small margin. You want to go with the flow and take the Gophers.
I don't. I'm going to take Michigan, take the Wolverines. I think your assessment there is pretty good as far as, trying to get a feel for that first quarter. And see kind of who's focused, who came to play, and do some kind of in-game betting. I think is probably pretty good play for this game. I mean, it should be a good game. We all know that Minnesota has the offense, but they've lost a lot of players on the defensive side of the ball. But Michigan's defense is going to be really good. I think that'll be enough. The concern for Michigan will be their offense. They have a new quarterback, Joe Milton. They have 4 new offensive linemen. They lost 5 of 7 wide receivers they had last year. Even with all that said, I still think they're going to be able to get the running game going, and that's going to be a difference maker, just enough for them to cover and win this game.
All right, before we wrap up here today, how about a quick final thought from you on Georgia with the week off on Saturday, getting back at it against Kentucky? Listen, evaluating how Georgia performs against Alabama, we'll save that again for December and the possibility of a rematch. But in terms of earning the right to play that game, did you see anything from Georgia this past Saturday that make you fearful that upcoming games against Kentucky and then Florida after that Georgia might not be ready for those, or the thought that the SEC championship berth belongs to the Dogs? Anything that would cause you to hesitate on that pick after the game against the Crimson Tide?
No, I thought Georgia came into that game confident. They played that first half pretty confident. You can't turn the ball over 3 times against big games and rival games and really good teams and expect to win. They got to be better at controlling the ball. I said that in my segment last week. I said, Stetson's going to have to be good with the ball. I thought he would have been a lot better. He had 3 turnovers. You just can't do that. They kind of got out in a funk in the second half with the game flow. I thought momentum really shifted. There's a lot of reasons why, and that just kind of got them out of that flow. They got to be better in like a urgent type offense when they have to change gears. That's something that under Kirby they haven't been able to do, and hopefully with Monken and the offense they can kind of get that going. I think there's a lot of takeaways for the team to learn and grow, from that game. If you look at the tape, there's a lot of times where there was a tight end open or the back out of the backfield that's wide open. Alabama's defense is awful. I think if you go look back that game film from the aerial view, you're going to see a whole bunch of Georgia players that are wide open. So a lot of missed opportunities. I think Stetson was just kind of caught in the moment. So again, I think it's really good. I think they know what's in front of them. Right, Georgia's been there before. They're gonna get through business, and as tough as it was to lose that game and disappointing that second half was, I think there's a lot of key takeaways that they can do and learn. And if they get that opportunity to play him again, I think it's a better situation playing him this time around with the want and, to fuel them to win because they know they should have won that game. I think they proved that they can hang with that team. I don't think there's like that this is Bama team this year. I don't think it's besides their offense just being so potent. I don't think there's anything scary about them on defense. So I think Georgia knows that. I think through that game they know that, and it's a much better situation than beating them and having to try to beat them again in the SEC championship game.
DARI, I think that's well said. Thanks for being here on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews today. Hope you enjoy the games this weekend.
Cool. Have a good one.
And to the rest of our audience, that's right. Go Dogs, even in an off week. The rest of our audience, hope you enjoy the games this week too. Maybe you can settle in and watch some football involving teams outside UGA and the SEC. Maybe even checking out some of the new Big Ten games there as well. And then get ready for the Dogs and the Wildcats next Saturday. A game we'll be previewing next week at the same time on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. We'll talk to you then.